Hi, I'm Josie Zweida, and I'll be leading through our Composers Talk today. We are here at Synchron Stage Vienna, where I also help to coordinate recording sessions and talk to clients from all over the world. We're going to go to our Stage B today. Follow me. This is our main hall, Stage A, where most recordings take place. As you can see, it's busy today. That's why we're going to go and have our interview in Stage B. Stage B, you can record piano, solo instruments, and small ensembles. I'm also a composer myself, and I spent a couple of years in LA where I worked for Hans Zimmer's Remote Control Productions and Bleeding Fingers Music. And that's where I met our composer for our interview today. His name is Phil Boucher. Phil is one of the composers for the very successful video game Fortnite. And he's recorded already a couple of times here at Synchron Stage Vienna. How his experience was and how he got there where he is today, we're going to find out. All right. Hi, Phil.
Hello.
Good to have you. Thanks so much for joining us here today.
Yeah, thank you.
We met at Remote Control, and you were a freelance composer at that point already, but you were an assistant to Jeff Zanelli for a couple of years before that, right? Mm-hmm. So I think everyone is really curious to hear your story, how you got into the film scoring and ended up with Jeff Zanelli as assistant. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I went to Berklee College in Boston. And when I started there, I didn't really know what I was going to do. I thought I was going there for engineering, actually. Like, I was a guitar player. I didn't really think much about film music. And I started to get into engineering. And then just sort of, while I was there, I was realizing that I'm working on these, like, concept albums and different things. And I was always sort of story-driven. And I started to look more into what the film scoring department had to offer. And it just started to sort of click that it made sense for me to shift majors and look at that. So I ended up graduating with both an engineering and a film scoring degree. And I came out to LA after college, and I got a job with a composer named Richard Gibbs. Worked for him for a few months, and then project ended, and he sent me off to go work for a friend of his for a while. There I met this percussionist named Satnam, who now everyone knows. He's done a lot of stuff with Hans over the years, but he was renting a room. I think he still is, but he was renting a room at Remote Control at the time. And we just got to chatting, kind of hit it off, and he passed my resume to a composer, Jeff Zanelli, at Remote, who was looking for an assistant at the time. Jeff was also a Berklee guy and had the same dual major of engineering and film scoring, so we just sort of clicked and hit it off, and just he needed someone, and it felt like we were compatible, and I started working there. I worked for Jeff for like 4.5 years, I think, between when I first started just like turning on computers and fixing tech problems to when I was doing writing until I finally broke free as a freelancer. And then I still write for Jeff from time to time. I rented a room at Remote for a couple years after being his assistant. Eventually it was time to leave, and I've been in this space now for a couple years. And as you know, I'm in the process of building a home studio, and I will soon have yet another new studio.
So since you said working for Jeff Zanelli, so just to mention that, probably everyone knows him by now, but he did the Pirates of the Caribbean, the last movie he scored. And I think he was with Hans, the whole series he did with Hans Zimmer. I
think Jeff is the only person other than Hans that wrote on all of them.
Oh, nice. I think I actually heard him talk about this once at an SCL meeting or something. I think that's why he got the gig too, why Hans let him do the whole thing. So I remember when I started at Remote and you were coming back and forth, I think it was the time that you guys did the Pirates of the Caribbean movie. So how was that for you? How was working on this big franchise film?
I mean, that was a lot of fun. So that was Pirates of the Caribbean 5. And when I started working for Jeff, not too long after, he was working on Pirates of the Caribbean 4. And I remember saying to my buddy Jason, who was an assistant to one of the other composers on the movie, I was like, man, it's so cool that we're working on this. Maybe by the time they do Pirates 6, we'll be able to write on one of these or something. So when they did Pirates 5 and Jeff got the gig, and I'd been doing so much writing with Jeff, it wasn't really a surprise that he called and asked me to help out on it. But it was so much fun. It was sort of like Pirates was one of those first scores that drew me into film music, and to kind of dissect that world and get inside of it and get to contribute to it was like sort of a little bit of a dream come true.
So since you said that too already, and I know that from my own experience as well, so as an assistant, it's not only and necessarily writing music for the composer you work for. So you have to do technical work, office stuff, like all this stuff. So how was it for you? Did you get to write for Jeff as an assistant quite early already, or did you have to pay your dues?
There was definitely some dues paying. I mean, I sort of hate that term, but I was hired to be a tech. So I was hired to make sure the computers were working and print stems and make sure that if there was an issue that everything was resolved. And I wasn't hired to write music. I was hired to make his life easier. And then obviously once you kind of get a handle on that stuff, then the composer wants to see what you can do and wants to see how else you can make their life easier. So he was doing some little, it was a commercial or something, and he said, here, just take this and go add some synths to it. Just to see what happened. He's like, don't worry too much about it. Just add a bunch of stuff and I'll go through it and see what I want to keep. So that was pretty early on that he gave me like a little bit of like a nugget of an opportunity. And then a few months later, he just got really busy where he had 2 or 3 films at the same time, and he needed some help. And he gave me a shot, but the deal was I had to be his assistant during the day he got in around 11 or 12 until 10 or 11 at night. So I'd have to be there for at least most of that time as his assistant. And then if I wanted to write, I had to do it on his rig. So I was getting in at like 3:30 in the morning, and I would write from 3:30 until 10 or 11 whenever he'd get in, and then be his assistant, and then go home and sleep for 3 or 4 hours, and then repeat that for 6 weeks or however long that project lasted. But it was my first time getting additional music and writing on a movie, and I was like, I was at the right age to not care how little I was sleeping, because it was just, I'm at remote control and I'm writing on a real movie and I'm getting all these opportunities. And Jeff seemed to be happy with what I was doing. Was the other huge thing is I didn't crash and burn, thankfully. So it all just of worked out. And then when we got on the other side of that, then it was easier for him to rely on me in the future, because he had seen that I was willing to go through that for the opportunity. So then when there were more writing opportunities, it was a little bit more normal, I'd say.
So how did you get into writing music for video games? Did you already write on video games with Jeff, or was that something that came afterwards?
Jeff did a little mobile game. It was a Call of Duty mobile game, and I got to do a little bit on that, but I can't really say it felt like scoring a video game. It was just a few little tracks. It just sort of happened. My best friend from college worked as an audio designer at a studio in San Diego, and I went down there and I met him and some of his friends, and they all ended up working at different studios after a couple of years, and the studio collapsed and they all go to work for different places doing different games, but we all stayed in touch. And so little by little they would ask me, oh, we've got this project coming up, do you want to send a demo for it or something? And so it wasn't something that I necessarily sought out, like I need to do video games. I thought that I was headed more towards film and TV, and I mean, I'm still doing that, but they gave me these opportunities to get in there and do games, and I grew up as a gamer, so it was kind of fun, and I understood it, and I think that they saw that I was bringing this Hollywood sensibility, whatever that means, to the gaming world, because I understood both sides of it.
And I mean, I already know it, but I think that story is so cool. Do you want to tell us how you got to write for Fortnite?
Yeah, Fortnite, like I said, most of these games came about through this like core group of friends, and Fortnite is the one exception where they were doing, it was season 8, and it was a pirate-themed season. And so the audio producer, audio director, I guess, said, well, who worked on the last Pirates of the Caribbean movie? Let's go see who worked on that movie. So he went to IMDb. I don't know why they didn't start with Hans or Jeff, but they went and they looked at the music department and they saw the additional writers, which thankfully I was one of them, looked us up and saw that I had done a little bit of other game work, went to the website, heard some of my samples, and just sort of like cold emailed me. I kind of thought it was a prank at first. Like they sent me a little contact form on the website and they sent me something and has an Epic Games email address and they say, we have an opportunity we think you'd be good for. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, who are these people? And then, so we had this meeting and they're describing what they have going on. And at the end of it, I'm like, okay, this all sounds good. Like I'm on board for sure. But like, how did you find me? And then they told me that story, which everyone tells you that, well, two things that people tell you is IMDb credits, additional music credits aren't really going to do much for your career. Like no one cares about additional music, and also writing additional music, no one is going to take the music that you wrote as seriously as if you were like the composer. And this was just like a perfect example of that not being true at all, because if I didn't have that little additional music credit, I wouldn't have gotten to score Fortnite for the last couple of years.
So, and with Fortnite, actually, you got to record live orchestra here in Vienna. I think last year, summertime or so was the first time. And you've been back for like, you're almost a regular now here.
Yeah, I think
so cool.
I think we've been there 3 times.
Yep, I remember 2 or 3 times.
Yeah.
So, how was your experience? Like, what do you think are the advantages or disadvantages of doing these things remotely? Obviously, you're not there in person. You don't get to meet or see musicians like in real life. It's via remote connection. How was that experience for you?
I'd done some remote sessions in the past with some other orchestras that we don't need to name. So I was pretty nervous going into the Vienna sessions. I mean, we had to do it because it was COVID times and there was no other way to record. We had to get some kind of remote orchestra that was doing better than the US was at the time. And I was sort of instantly put at ease once we got started, because I don't know if it's something that Synchron specifically is doing or if it's just technology has gotten better in the last few years, but there was virtually no lag, no delay. It felt like being there, other than, you know, looking at a little Zoom screen instead of being out in the room with the musicians. But it was as close to being there as possible without actually being there.
And to add on that, like, would you want to come in person someday? Like, I think you told me personally, oh, maybe one day I'll be able to hop on a plane and come to Vienna.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to. I know that the facility itself is gorgeous, and I know it's either been renovated or a lot of it is just new, right? So I'm sure it's a fantastic place to come to. And then just beyond that, Vienna is such an incredible city with a musical history. Like, who wouldn't want to go there?
Oh, nice. Well, I will show you around if you ever get to Vienna. So how do you feel about, like, you wrote for movies, you wrote for TV, and then for video games? Like, what's the difference to write for a video game?
You know, it depends. I mean, some games are much closer to what it feels like to work on a film, and some games are more almost like library music, where you're just sort of writing a collection of tracks that are going to get placed. Most things end up being somewhere in between. If there's one big difference between the two, to me, it's that a lot of times when you're working on a game, the game doesn't exist yet or is in very rough stages. So even if you're working on a film that was all shot against green screen, like, you know, Pirates and Marvel movies and stuff, so much of it is added later. You at least have an actor's performance or some kind of idea of where things are going. And sometimes, there's one game I was doing, they're like, yeah, there's going to be an ice level and we need music for it. I'm like, what does it look like? Well, we don't have any concept art yet. It's like, oh, what are the enemies? Well, we don't know yet. We're still deciding that, which is fine because it's just a different like production process where they might have this one area of the game completely done to prove out certain mechanics and concepts and art style. And then most of the game is sort of not touched until pretty late in the process, where you can't wait that long to get started on the music.
So is this hard then to, like, since you say you don't have a lot of idea where the game is actually going to go, like in which like style you're actually writing the music for?
It's just different. I'd say it requires a little bit more imagination. And usually what I've found, and maybe I've just gotten lucky, is whatever I write ends up working pretty well or people are happy. Sometimes I have to be my worst critic and say, oh, well, now that I see that this area is purple and I thought it was going to be more like orange and daylight and it's more of like this icy nighttime thing, makes me want to go back and change the music. And there's not always time for that, but you hope that there's some kind of like final path you can go, even if it's some small tweaks. Once you know what something's going to end up being, it can make a big difference on the end result. So it's nice to have that time.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I hear you. So, how is the process? Let's say Fortnite, but other games as well. Is it like very fast paced? You have like a week to score everything. I mean, that's exaggerated, but is it like, as you say, the long nights you have to put in, and everything's very stressful towards the end, and orchestration is not done by the time the recording session is scheduled? Like all these things that we've been going through too, as a recording studio and as a composer as well. So, how is the usual thing with the video games?
In general, I'd say they're actually not as crazy as films. I'd say that the overall schedule, there ends up being a lot more time, so you can get out ahead of it. Because of things like I said, where we're not waiting for all these things to be done before we can get started, we're doing stuff sort of in tandem with the game getting put together. If I had to wait for the game to be done for me to start writing, if it was a bigger game and there's 2+ hours of music, you would never make it. So because of that, some of these projects, I've been working on this one project, I was supposed to be done in February. We're still only about 50% of the way done because they're working on things on their side. So things just expand, and usually it ends up being in my favor that we get more time. I mean, that said, there's definitely been the last minute request of this game is coming out next week, and we had some testers, they're getting really confused by this area or something. We need some kind of musical stinger or transition, or we need some musical cues that can help guide the player through the section or something. So some of that stuff you can't tell until the last minute.
So do you work now on, like, is video game like your main thing now? You work on movies as well and TV stuff? I don't know how much you can tell us and whatnot, but we're curious.
At least for the last 15 months, however long COVID's been going on, it's been, I think, entirely games, which is just sort of part of the industry because a lot of film and TV work got shut down because no one could do anything. But thankfully, game work was mostly able to keep going. You know, people could move their rigs home or keep making these things. The only thing that you have to be in a room for is like motion capture for actors or something, like similar to animation for film. So I would like to be getting back into doing some more film, but I'm very thankful to be in the video game world, and it's kept me busy for the last 15 months.
I actually met a couple of composers who don't play instruments. Most people I know, like, are composers who are musicians and everything. So I know you play guitar. Is there anything else you played as a kid or still maybe?
Well, first of all, I just find that to be a very bizarre thing that you just said, that there are composers that don't even play an instrument. Like, you have to play something, right? Like, I don't know. Whatever. That's a separate topic.
It's a separate thing, but there are some. Actually, it's weird.
I mean, my first instrument was trumpet. When I was in grade school, I played trumpet, and I used to play in like my church and got a scholarship to go in some like local competition or something. But I don't know, it never really grabbed me. I don't know why. It was okay, and I practiced it because I liked music, but it didn't really get me until I was towards the end of middle school, which would be like 8th grade, 7th or 8th grade here. I started
like marching band kind of stuff, what you played, or like in school?
No, it was like there was an orchestra, but it was like a grade school orchestra, so we weren't very good, and I couldn't even tell you a single piece that we played. I'm sure we played like some Mozart pieces and some like very simple things, relatively simple. No Mahler, I don't think. But no, I started playing the guitar in 7th or 8th grade, and that sort of became my main instrument, and that's still, I mean, I have a collection of a bunch of guitars and other stringed instruments now. I mean, I can fake my way through, like, keyboard. I probably play the keyboard more than anything else just because it's right in front of the computer and that's how I write.
Right.
I can't say that I'm by any means a good pianist. And like various little percussion instruments, shakers and stuff when you're just trying to beef up a track. But guitar is by far my main instrument.
Right. And you're trying to incorporate it in music you write for whatever project, right?
When I can. For a long time, I felt like guitar is a really hard instrument to use in a film context. I think it can get really cheesy really quick and do that like 80s Top Gun thing if you're not careful.
Right.
I think that with where production has gotten, there's a lot of ways now to sort of add it as a texture and include it to just give some life to something that otherwise would be all
Right.
samples without it needing to be a featured instrument.
So how is your work day or like your whole working attitude different now as a composer than it used to be when you started off? Or what would you tell your younger self now who's like all eager, having 24-hour work days working on Pirates? And now that's where you got to do your own big projects. What would you tell yourself?
One thing that I've come to appreciate in the last few years is my music education. And there were a lot of things that I learned in college that I didn't really pay much attention to. Like, I never liked jazz, and Berklee is a jazz school, and the way that they teach things is very in that world. And there's plenty of other examples of that when they're talking about like film music history or other genres of music that, I was a metal kid. I didn't care about learning how to write like a funk bass line or something. And now I'll be writing something and they'll need a country track, or they'll need like a spy track, or they'll need something that's just completely outside of what I ever would have thought. And I go digging through my brain for the lessons that I had. And so I guess the wider way of thinking of it is just there's no bad information, or there's no bad thing to learn. And the more you can fill your brain with different styles and concepts, the more you can draw from when the time comes and you need to go. Because, like so much of what you do in media music is outside of what you would want to do, or not even want to do, but what you grew up doing. It's not all Hans Zimmer epic music or sweeping, beautiful orchestral melodies. We need a rock track, we need a punk track, we need any random thing. And so being open-minded and just absorbing everything you can, I think would be the main thing I would tell my previous self. And get more sleep.
Nice. How do you handle like criticism? Like it's something people like we have to learn, right? I mean, at the beginning, everyone thinks, like criticism is something not like necessarily positive. Someone tells you, and your ego or yourself, you have to kind of like process it. It's over the years. I think it changes. What is it for you now when someone like critiques your work? Like,
do you mean criticism from like a director, or do you mean criticism from the internet?
No, no, not the internet. Like a director or a game company, like, people we work for.
Like notes, like how do when I get feedback on a cue if they don't like it?
Or if you like, since, we work for someone and they're the producers, they're like, can decide which direction should go and what they like, what they don't like. And sometimes yourself might actually think, oh, this is great. Why do you think it's not good enough? So it's just like the thing when you start off, like I've had this in my own experience too, it feels like, why? And then after a while, you kind of start to learn how to cope with notes and criticism. How was that for you?
Yeah. I don't think that much about it. I think I'm very aware that the music that I'm writing is not for me, it's for them. So there's sort of no point in telling someone that what they want is bad. I mean, there's technical reasons why someone might ask for a note. There was something recently where we had a 10-second chunk of music, and every cut of the film was on a downbeat of the music. and they said, oh, well, we took out 6 frames on this side and we added it over here. Can you just adjust the music to fit that? Which normally would be fine, but it was so tied to the edit. I just told, there's no way that we can do this and preserve the musical feel that you want. So that was an example where they got it and they said, oh yeah, you're right, we'll put it back. And they actually changed their picture to match the music. But that's sort of
nice.
an exception. I mean, normally, if I write something and they say, this needs to be more exciting or this needs to be more energetic, or the melody, I mean, I think every composer has had the note, why does the melody go down? It should go up because up is more exciting. And if that's how someone feels about it, you can't convince them otherwise. And it's their project.
Right.
And if that's what they want and that makes them happy, within reason, like I'm not going to do something that I think sounds terrible. But I want the client to be happy. I want it to be impactful. And they've lived with it a lot longer than I have. So they know more about their project than I do. You know, I've got a fresh perspective on it, but they have a vision. And so we're just all trying to get to what that vision is. And almost always, the notes make it better. I can usually, even if I'm, you know, muttering under my breath when I'm doing something and this is stupid, it's normally, I think it's stupid because I spent 10 hours working on this 20 seconds of music and I think it's great. And then they want something different and it's just, it feels like lost work. But in the end, if it's more satisfying or somehow more successfully telling the story, then that's all that matters.
So when you like that story with the editing and you had to like cut it or like make the music work to a way that was musically kind of not possible. So is it difficult or how do you like communicate with directors? Not everyone has like a musical background or they sometimes don't know how to speak language music. So it has to be like a different conversation. Obviously, a thing like that where they don't know musically, it's not going to work out anymore when you edit it to the scene. How do you communicate with people who are not speaking music?
Well, in that case, I think I was only successful because we had a relationship already. We've done a lot of projects together, so they know that I'm not some person to just say no, and that I'm usually trying to find any solution I can to what they suggest. And if I'm bringing something up, they know that I'm telling them for a reason. And they're musical, and I mean they cut the picture to the music, so it's musical enough that they have some kind of inherent sensibility, even if they can't talk about keys and instruments. That's sort of not important. So they did just on a fundamental level understand why it wouldn't work.
Right. But in like, I think it's also something that Hans said in an interview once or twice, that it has to be a different language we use when we talk to directors, producers, since they are not in the music world. Like when I talk to as an assistant to my composer boss, it's obviously we can speak music. And when there's someone involved who are, of course, hearing things and they know what they want to hear and have a vision of how the music should be, but cannot necessarily say exact when you say like it has to go up, not down. It's just kind of a different thinking than as a musician. You would say, wow, you could make it more exciting too, just going down. It's just tension can be created in different ways.
When there are when there are notes like that, I tend to ask a follow-up question, which is why, or what are you trying to achieve? Because it's easy for someone to point to something and think that it's the problem. Like, I don't like that French horn there. I don't like the strings or something. But the question is why? Because 9 times out of 10, it's actually not that thing that they don't like. It wasn't prepared in the right way. It's not set up in the right. It's not. When we get there, it doesn't feel natural. So it might be that actually the problem is the 20 seconds of music beforehand that need to change to make this a successful. I mean, sometimes it's just you shouldn't have a French horn, but it's just as likely that there's some other reason that it's not working that isn't what they think. So it's important to ask why, or what are we not getting out of this moment that you're trying to achieve?
So do you have any role models or mentors? Do you have like music you listen to when you want to get inspired? Is there any specific you don't have to call composers like specifically by name, but or just some genre of film music you actually listen to when you want to get inspired?
Usually if I'm trying to get inspired, it's not film music that I want to listen to. It's usually it's the farthest thing from whatever I've been working on. I want to listen to a singer-songwriter if I've been doing like an epic track, or I want to listen to some metal music if I've been doing something more like sweeping and romantic. You know, it's just, I want to listen to stuff either that, we all have those tracks from our childhood or growing up that are like, you can listen to that Metallica album every day for the rest of your life and like it's still a good album. Or I want to see like what's going out in the world these days, what's new, what's exciting that I don't know. So I want to get inspired by new artists more than what the latest film score was, because it's sort of not as important.
Right. Anything besides music that gets you inspired? Like, do you go out for nature? You go to the beach since you live not so far from the beach? It's like things like that. Do you?
You might be able to
enjoy
tell
these
from my
things?
complexion that I don't spend a lot of time at the beach. I do like nature. I mean, like I love to be in the woods or mountains or any of that stuff.
Yeah.
Just going to
Yeah.
other cities, just getting out of LA, because LA is kind of a weird city. So going just to other places and just recalibrating your mentality, I think is important. I also like to cook,
Right.
just doing
Oh, I know
something
that.
completely different from music. I'd say when I want to get inspired, I kind of have to get away from music for a little while, and it can be doing yard work, it can be cooking, it can be sort of anything else.
Do you like try to keep your workload? I mean, you can only like do it when you have time for everything, but you try to like have a normal working day and have like the weekend off, or try to like finish at a specific time at nighttime. I mean, if you have a deadline and it has to be done by tomorrow, obviously you can. But in general, do you try to get in the studio by, let's say, 10, as you said before, and go out by 6, 7-ish, or is it different every day?
It really depends on how busy things are. I'd say a typical day for me, I start around 8 in the morning and I'll work until 7 and then make dinner and then try not to work in the evening after dinner. But it just sort of depends. If there's a lot to get done, then I'll just keep working.
Of course.
If I can get at least one day off on a weekend or a half day off on a weekend, I feel like I'm doing pretty well. Like doing the 7 days a week, 14 hours a day for a month, 6 weeks straight I feel like I've done that and I don't want to do it again. Unless I mean, if you have to, you have to. But thankfully, I've managed to be efficient enough with my time and stay on schedule so that I don't need to do that very often.
Right. Well, good for you. It's not the 14-hour days every day anymore. So, are you allowed to tell us like what you're working on, or probably not? But is it like, since you already mentioned to me once that Fortnite seems like a TV show now because there's so many episodes coming out, so is this going to be continued? Can we expect to get more?
You're right. I can't say much. There is Fortnite going on all the time. I'm thankful for the time being to at least still be writing some of it. I have another game in progress that has not been announced, but that should be pretty exciting once it does. So standard nebulous composer answer that tells you nothing.
Yeah, great. But you're busy, it seems, so that's good.
Yes.
Well, awesome. Thanks so much for taking the time and doing this interview with us today. And also for getting up early, since we're 9 hours apart. That was quite an early morning for you. Yeah, hopefully we're going to see you again very soon at Synchron Stage. And in the meantime, take care. Bye-bye.